The wind blew dry across the plains as dusk settled over the ranch, carrying with it the scent of dust, hay, and the weight of a long, merciless day. Emma wiped the sweat from her brow with the back of her hand, her fingers calloused and raw, from the hours she had spent hauling bales, fixing the broken fence, and tending to the restless cattle. Her father had passed the winter before, leaving the ranch to her and her younger siblings, and since then the days had become one long, unending labor. With bills piling on the kitchen table and the nearest help 20 miles away, there was no time for rest, no room for weakness, and no choice but to push forward even when her body begged her to stop. Tonight was no different. The sun dipped below the horizon, painting the sky in streaks of orange and violet, and still Emma worked, her boots sinking into the dry soil as her shoulders ached beneath the weight of a feed sack. She could barely lift. She stumbled, caught herself against the wooden rail, and muttered under her breath, "Just a little more, just until morning." That's when she heard the soft crunch of hooves behind her. She turned, startled, and there he was, Caleb Turner, the quiet cowboy from the neighboring ranch, tall in the saddle with his head tilted low and a look of concern etched on his face. He'd passed by before, always with a polite nod or a few words about the weather, but tonight his eyes didn't leave hers. "Emma," he said, his voice low and steady, "you're out here alone again?" She forced a tired smile. Someone's got to keep this place from falling apart. He swung down from his horse and stepped closer, his boots scuffing the dirt. "You look like you're about to fall apart yourself." She wanted to argue, to tell him she was fine, that this was her burden and no one else's, but the truth trembled at the edge of her lips. The nights had been long, the days longer, and there was only so much a person could carry before the weight bent them low. Caleb saw at the slump of her shoulders, the tremor in her hands, and without waiting for her to ask, he said quietly, "Let me shoulder this with you." Emma stared at him, unsure whether to laugh or cry. She had been raised on pride and grit, taught that to ask for help was to admit defeat, and yet something in Caleb's voice, something steady, unspoken, made the walls inside her tremble. "You don't have to," she whispered, but he only shook his head. "I know I don't, but I will." And so, the next morning, he was back before the first light reached the hills, bringing with him a thermos of strong coffee, and a pair of hands that knew the rhythm of the land. Together they mended fences, her fingers brushing his as they hammered in the last nail. They drove the cattle to higher pasture before the rains, his voice calm and certain when the herd threatened to scatter. They worked until the ache in her muscles felt shared, divided between them like the weight of an old sorrow made lighter by company. Slowly, the ranch began to change. The fields looked less barren, the barns less broken, and Emma, though she still rose before dawn, found herself humming some mornings instead of sighing. She caught herself watching him when he didn't notice, the sun catching the edge of his jaw, the quiet way his eyes softened when he looked at her siblings running across the yard. One evening, as the horizon blazed with the colors of another fading day, they sat on the porch steps, hands stained with the day's work. "Why are you doing this, Caleb?" she asked, her voice barely louder than the crickets. He shrugged, eyes fixed on the distant hills. "Because no one should have to carry the world alone. I've been there. It breaks a person." "And what do you get out of it?" she asked. He turned to her then, a faint smile tugging at his lips. "Maybe a reason to come back each morning." The weeks stretched on, the work continued, and in the spaces between labor and silence, something took root, quiet, unhurried, but real. He was not a man of many words, but his actions spoke loud enough. The way he stayed late when storms threatened, the way he showed her brother how to set a proper fence post, the way he left wildflowers on the windowsill without saying a word. By the time the first frost kissed the earth, the ranch had begun to feel alive again. The debts weren't gone, the winters would still be hard, but there was a sense now of something more than survival. Emma no longer moved as though chased by failure. She stood straighter, laughed easier, and found her hands reaching for Caleb's without quite meaning to. One night, as the stars spilled across the black sky, they stood side by side in the yard, the scent of hay and cold wind wrapping around them. "You came when this place was breaking," she said softly. "When I was breaking." "No," he murmured. "You were holding everything together." I just came to hold a little of it to her breath caught. And now, he took off his hat, ran a hand through his hair, and let the silence stretch between them like a road waiting to be traveled. Now I stay, he said. If you'll have me. She didn't answer with words, not at first. She simply stepped closer, laid her head against his shoulder, and let the tiredness slip from her bones. Together they looked out at the ranch, the land her father loved, the life she was learning to rebuild, and for the first time in a long time, Emma felt that the burden she carried was no longer hers alone. There would be hard days still, storms to weather, seasons to endure. But there was also this, a partner who had seen her at her lowest and said, without condition, "Let me shoulder this with you. And if this story touched your heart, if it made you believe that even in the hardest times, someone can come along to share the weight, subscribe to this channel. There are more stories waiting, of cowboys and courage, of heartbreak turned to hope, of the kind of strength that grows when two people stand together instead of apart. Don't miss the next one.